Perfect. Asheesh, will you permit me a bit of silliness we haven't done before?
Yeah, what's going to happen?
Come here.
I actually don't know.
Come here. Yeah, this is great. We're going to do a speaker selfie, which is something I've always wanted to do, but never actually gotten around to doing.
Where am I supposed to be?
Over here.
Okay.
Okay, right? Okay, everybody say cheese.
Cheese. Wait, who was photobombing it?
I was going to have everybody shout security, but I realized that might be bad. Building management might get confused. So cheese seemed like a safer option.
All right.
Hi, my name is Philip James. I lead the platform team at Patreon in San Francisco. I've given a number of talks about security over the years. I've worked adjacent to security teams for a number of years, and I really am passionate about keeping systems safe and building them to be user-friendly at the same time.
My name's Asheesh. I am a systems engineer at Reduct, which is a tiny 7-person startup where, therefore, the small engineering team does everything. In the past, I've worked at Eventbrite as a security engineer, and I love paying attention to this stuff.
So we like giving talks together. These are some of the talks that we've given together and separately. Right now, what you need to know is that we have worked on a lot of websites. We've worked on a lot of web applications in Python. We've worked on back-end API infrastructure in Python. Some of the things we've worked on have been good. Some of them haven't been so good. We spent a number of years trying to stay on top of the best account security practices, and we know we've done it badly. This is kind of a letter to our past selves that you all get to enjoy with us. So I'm going to start with some bad news. I'm sorry to start on a bad note. People who use your website are going to lose control of their accounts. Gonna happen. And it's probably going to end up being your problem when they do. So let me define losing control of an account. If Asheesh here has an account on your website and someone else can log into it without Asheesh's permission, something has gone wrong. If Asheesh permits someone else to use his account, that's out of scope for this talk. With that said, account security is all the techniques that go into making sure Asheesh is the only one who can access his account on your website. We're going to focus on techniques that relate to that specifically. You're going to have to make sure that your app doesn't have other really big problems like remote code execution or cross-site request forgery or whatever else.
And if you want to learn more about those topics, you can look at the Django security tutorial that Philip and I and another friend gave at PyCon a few years ago.
Yep. By the way, that down at the bottom, hopefully those are somewhat legible, are our Twitter handles, and there's the PyCascades hashtag, doesn't say 2019. Oh well. If you learn something or you want to talk to us about these things, feel free to tweet at us, and we will respond to them after the talk probably. So yeah, account security. We want you to get 3 big pieces of advice from this talk. Make it costly to take over an account, help your users stay informed about potential account takeovers, and empower your users to defend themselves when an account takeover might be happening. The reason to do these things is that it's a pretty scary internet out there, and your users know this. The amazing thing about this montage, if you're looking carefully, because we did, each of these breaches happened in the past year. This is just like the headlines of the past year of account breaches, and all of them had something to do with account security information. Each of these breaches makes it more likely that a user's account on your site is going to get breached because we know that users are pretty likely to reuse both email addresses and passwords on their sites. So the main thing you can do to protect your users is to make it hard for other people to take over their accounts. And Asheesh is going to start by talking about passwords specifically.
So I've put here a list of the most popular passwords. Literally, like, I'm not kidding. These come from breaches. A research team went and just sorted, and these are the top ones. And if your users use 12345 as their password, or 123456, their account is practically public. Somehow it's still a really popular password. So to avoid these kinds of passwords, security people created the idea of password rules. So here's some special characters, here's some numbers. The most common rules are inspired by a publication from the National Institute of Standards and Technology from 2003. And I recently read an interview with the guy who wrote that publication. Not joking. Literally Bill Burr's words, he's sorry. He was on a tight deadline in 2003, And he published a bunch of advice, which, we know how he feels about it. It's OK. We can all get past that advice. There are new rules from NIST published in the past couple of years. And they focus on the importance of making sure your users aren't using common passwords on your site. My favorite way to do that is to use a JavaScript library published by Dropbox. So here are 3 screenshots of the account creation form on the Python package index. PyPI, warehouse, cheese shop, same thing. And in the form, I've entered 3 of the most popular passwords. And you can see that despite ABC123 having letters and numbers, it's still red password strength. And that's because it's a very common password. PyPI is using Dropbox's open source library called ZXCVBN, which has anyone detected the joke in the name here? OK, so it's ASDF moved down a row on the keyboard. I didn't until I read the docs. That thing checks if the password is in the most popular 30,000 passwords. It's written in JavaScript so that you can run it in the user's browser before they even send you the bad password. They're stopped, and they'll change it. There are some other goodies in that new NIST publication. I really recommend searching for it and reading it. But the most important aspect in it is to ask users to use uncommon passwords. ZXCVBN can help in the JavaScript front end. And I also want to talk about checking that on the Python backend. So Troy Hunt runs a free website and API called haveibeenpwned or haveibeenowned.com. He publishes a list of SHA-1 hashes of passwords that he has founded in breached websites, along with the email addresses of the accounts involved. And there's an email input right there. This is a real website. If you're lucky, your users are typing their email address into this thing and checking for themselves periodically. But chances are they are not. There's also a really good chance that they're using the same password on one site that got breached, I see some nodding heads, as they want to use on your site. Since Troy only publishes SHA-1 hashes of passwords, you can't loop over his database and check for those passwords in your database because of the way password hashing works usually. I will show you something you can do. You can send the raw password. So when the user is trying to log into your site, you have the password they're using. And same with when they're setting up their account for the first time. You can send that to the haveibeenpwned API. They make a privacy-conscious API where you send the first 5 characters of the SHA-1 hash of the password, and they respond with the full SHA hashes of the password. All the passwords that match that have showed up in breaches. And if you don't want to query an API, you can download the full list from them. It's about 11 gigabytes compressed. By the way, I hear some chuckling. PyPI and other sites do use this haveibeenowned API. I will say that Django has a built-in user system that solves the same problem in a different way offline. Django bundles, as of the most recent version, as of 2.1, a list of the top 30,000 passwords. And so it checks against those when an account gets created. If you do want to use the haveibeenowned API, there are 2 options for integrating with Python, for integrating with Django. So here they are, both published by people whose names are kind of like James. OK. And a third thing you can do is to read the source code to the Python package index. The Python package index uses Pyramid, and so they integrate directly with the haveibeenpwned API. You can read that. It's pretty easy reading. Strong passwords are an important aspect of account security, but they're only one factor. You can add more factors for more account security, and Philip will tell you about that.
If I were in a caption contest, I would say, this is a picture of two-factor authentication. You all probably know this. You all probably use it for some of your accounts already. Multi-factor authentication is the thing where you, as the developer, can insist people use something in addition to their password to log in, typically a phone. I'm going to talk about different ways people set up multi-factor authentication to hopefully encourage you to do it for your site. But before I proceed, I want to say how phishing relates to multi-factor authentication. Most MFA schemes are phishable. You're adding another factor, but you're not making it phishing-proof. There are some techniques we're going to be talking about later on that decrease the chance of phishing, but MFA is not a phishing panacea. You still need to be thinking about those kinds of attacks. The two main ways people set up MFA is through SMS or with an app. With SMS, you send them a short-term code, and they type it into your website. SMS is not free of cost to send, however, and if you're looking for a solution that you as the developer can implement more easily and perhaps more cheaply to you, you can use something like Google Authenticator. This is Google Authenticator. How many of you are using Google Authenticator or some app like it right now? Wow. Awesome, fantastic. Great, now keep your hands up if you've set up an integration with Google Authenticator.
Wow.
More hands than we were expecting, but still a lot less hands than the people using it. So that's okay. There are definitely packages that can help you that we'll be talking about later. But the big thing to know is that app-based MFA like this is really just your server and your user's device agreeing on what number is going to be valid at what time. The app can generate the number as the server, therefore no need to send an SMS. So that's pretty good. If you have users who want two-factor security, then you can set this up for them and not pay anything to Twilio. Sorry, Twilio. There's something else you can support for free as well. This is a picture of a YubiKey. How many people have a YubiKey? Wow, great. How many people have set up U2F for their service? Okay, yeah, that's the number of hands we were expecting. YubiKey supports a standard called U2F, or Universal Second Factor. I bring it up because it's an alternative to asking people to pull out their phones and either get texted or open an app. Since implementing keys like YubiKeys internally, Google has eliminated corporate account takeover. The main thing to know about U2F is that the browser sends the domain name to the U2F device, and therefore it's much harder to phish than other SMS MFA or password-based authentication mechanisms. Setting up U2F does involve creating a certificate, so it's a bit more hassle than other forms of MFA, but it's still probably worthwhile and offering for your users. They do have to buy a token, but you can also just mail them one, kind of up to your security model. At this point, I'm just going to give you a list of resources. So there's multiple excellent sponsors here who would love to help you get it set up with SMS MFA, if that's what you want to be doing. You can also use TOTP as the name of the spec that helps generate the codes, Google Authenticator, et cetera. There's a Python library for that. And there's a Python library for doing U2F. So all of these things are totally doable for your site. Two-factor authentication is one way to secure accounts, even if the password isn't super secure. But Asheesh is going to talk about a whole another way of logging into accounts that makes the password less relevant.
So here's how Slack asks me to log in. I get an email, I click a link, the app finds a token, Slack finds a token in the URL that I clicked, and now I find myself logged in. How many of you have used this mechanism on Slack? Cool. Do you like it? Wow, I see some mixed reviews. OK, great. So Slack is betting anyway that users and the user's email provider care more about their email account than their Slack passwords. And Slack is really leaning on email account providers to help prevent account takeovers. For all the Slack users with Gmail accounts, Slack is asking Google to be the first line of protection to prevent Slack account takeovers. So Slack is really betting that the Google account security team is pretty good at protecting Gmail. And that's a pretty good bet for you to make, too, if you want, with your app. So to me, this fits into the pattern of making it as costly as possible to take over an account. The attacker's cost for a Gmail user now includes the cost of breaking into Gmail, which is presumably quite difficult. Slack does also have a username and password login scheme, and I actually think they don't want me to use it. They really seem to push me toward this. And I think that's because Slack really benefits from knowing that when I'm logging in, I'm in control of my email account at the same time. So I'll talk briefly about how to implement something like this. So if you use Django, there's a Django package that does this for you. It's called Django Token Off. And if you want to implement it yourself, you need to store a random token in your database. At Sandstorm, a company I used to work at, we used a slight variant of that, which is we store the hash of the token in our database. That way, this gives you one useful thing, which is that if somebody manages to steal your entire database, they can't also go log into all the accounts on your server using what they've stolen, which is like that wouldn't be great, but it helps a little. One thing to know about data storage, these are random tokens. The they're not going to index well in a database. Databases try to use cool tricks to shrink the index. You're going to end up with a database table whose index is the same size as the table itself. And by the way, so I saw some like resistance to the Slack login thing from somebody. Personally, when I first saw this, thought it was weird and insecure. And then I realized it's basically the same as doing a password reset. Those also get sent out by email. And most users, by and large, have pretty bad passwords. It's true. Mine are okay on most sites. I use a password manager, but you can't bet on that for your users. So we could say a lot more about making it costly to take over accounts, but there's other aspects of account security we want to talk about as well.
So once you've done the first pass on making accounts hard to take over, your next step is to help your users help themselves. You can do all sorts of things to make it difficult for someone to take over an account, but the person who really knows if an account has been taken over is the person who created the account. So give them the tools to help you know when something is wrong. This section could also be called building trust in your users, because a lot of these patterns are actually things you can do to signal to your users that you've got their backs, that you are paying attention and watching out for their accounts, and they have seen all of the breaches that we showed at the beginning. Your users probably have security nihilism. They expect their account to be taken over, and anything you can do to help them build trust reflects better on you as the app maintainer and makes it less likely that their account will be taken over and stay taken over. How many of you have seen one of these before? Notification from Facebook? Yeah, great. Facebook and Google are really good at proactively letting the user know when something weird has happened with their account. They both use email login notifications like the ones pictured here, and in some cases use their in-app notification system to let the user know that something has happened. When I get notifications like this, what I feel is a big ball of trust from Google or Facebook that they're paying attention to what's going on with my account. You can share this warm ball of trust with your users pretty easily, it turns out, and fight back some of the security nihilism. If you've paid very close attention to Google and Facebook's security practices over the years, you'll see they don't always send you a notification because they have big machine learning data science teams that can detect the right time to send a notification. But you probably don't need all of that to provide this first level of information to your users. You could say, save the user's last accessed IP address or geolocation, and then send them an email if that changes. Here's some code that might get this done for Django. We're using the Django signals framework here. We're listening for the user logged in signal. And if the user's last IP, which we've saved on a table somewhere, doesn't match the current request IP, send them a login notification. Let them know, hey, you got a new login on your account. Did you expect for this to happen? The cool thing about this is once you have this set up, you can continue to tweak the rules until you're not delivering so many notifications that it's bothersome to your users. Additionally, you can use code like this to send them an in-app notification if you're using something like Django's Messages framework. This will do, at the same point, add a message to the Messages framework that you can then render the next time the user loads a page and be like, hey, by the way, we detected this weird login notification. Did you mean for this to happen? If you go a tiny step further and spin up a table for storing session information, or use Django's Sessions table feature, you can now build one of the systems like Google or Facebook that shows you the list of actively logged in sessions and help your users be informed about who's using their account. Once you've unlocked the power of comparing information about logins and sessions, the world is your oyster. And there's a more advanced technique that Asheesh is going to talk about now.
So the pattern we've just implemented can be used for all sorts of events your users would like to know about. Like for instance, password changes. If an attacker broke into a user's account and changed the password, it's going to be really important for the actual user to get that problem resolved fast. Since we still live in an age where there's no universal replacement for passwords, you as the app maintainer should do everything you can to let your users know when the app password has changed. Slack-style email login makes passwords less important, which is good, but it doesn't prevent you from needing to control the user's password and letting them know when it's changed. So I'll show you one way to do that. Here's some sample code in something like Django. This is a subclass of the user model. You could apply this to any other framework too. The key thing we're doing here is that when the user model is instantiated, we store a copy of the password so that then later, when in the same request, the save method gets called. If it does, we can compare the user's current password that we've stored in the model, in the class instance, against what's being saved now. And then we can send them an email. So as an aside, here's a picture of mint.com asking me for my bank password. I bring this up because if you build a useful website, others might want to integrate with it, and users are going to hand out their passwords if you're not careful. This is why people make OAuth APIs, so that a user can hand over an API token instead. If the API token gets compromised, it's easy enough for a user to revoke it, or you can do that yourself.
So the most advanced technique that we're going to talk about for the keeping your users informed section is notifications about other breaches. You can notify users about breaches you detect in general, even if they aren't necessarily related to your site. Remember all these breaches? Troy Hunt's Have I Been Pwned database has all of them. In fact, that's where we got these screenshots. And it includes the email address for any accounts that have been breached. There's a thing you can do with those emails, which is potentially send your users a notification when their email is detected in another breach. Because as we said, the odds that they're using the same password for your website and the breached website is very high. This is an email from Credit Karma that they sent that doesn't look very happy, but is also kind of like, cheerful, modern colors and a cute little icon. You can do something like this and make it very clear to your users that, hey, the breach was found in another site. This is the riskiest technique because it can backfire. It's the best thing you can do to keep your users informed because they aren't going to be going into Have I Been Pwned themselves, but they could misinterpret your email and have it read as, oh, your site was breached. So if you're going to do this and you have access to your communications or legal team, run it by them once first before starting to send these out.
Ask Philip in the Q&A later why he said that.
No reason. So we've talked about a few ways to present information to your users to help them know what's going on with their accounts. But we want to close with some specific ways you can help them act on that information.
So here's a picture of what it looks like when I change my Facebook password. We talked earlier about the possibility of showing a list of sessions where I'm logged in, sessions of where the user is logged in to the user. Facebook, you can see here, gives you the option of logging out the other devices. This feature can be hard to implement, and users might not go looking for it. So there's a simpler approach I want to tell you all about. If a user changes their password, they might be worried someone else has the old password. So it can be a good idea to log the attacker out. So in 2012, Durley Rodriguez asked on the Django user mailing list how to implement that, how to invalidate active sessions after a password change. There was no built-in feature, so Durley implemented it himself. And later on, a fellow named Albert implemented a reusable app that accomplishes the same thing. And in Django 1.7, Tim Graham implemented this feature using the same algorithm that Albert and Durley used. The idea is to store a HMAC of the user's password in the session, and that way, when the user changes their password, you can check the session data. No. That way, when a user logs in, you can see if the HMAC of the password is still the same as it used to be. It allows Django to invalidate previous sessions without being able to query them, because the hashed password is stored in the session. So being able to change session data is a pretty powerful tool. And there's one more technique I want to show you about. First, I'll ask you a question. How many people here are logged into GitHub right now? I know I am. Great. And how many people ever remember logging out of GitHub intentionally?
Like once, maybe?
Yeah, so not as many people. I said we want to try to limit the damage when an account is compromised. And if a user lets a friend use their laptop and the friend visits GitHub, you might wonder how much damage they can do. So here's a picture of GitHub's feature called Pseudomode. They ask you for your password again when you're doing something sensitive, like adding a new SSH key. I want to talk very briefly about how to implement this. So if you have a Django View that does something dangerous, maybe upgrading the user's account, here might be some code for it. It requires the user's logged in. It requires a post. It'll look at the user's payment plan and upgrade it. And what we can do is check for a thing that we'll call Pseudomode with a magical decorator that I'll explain how it's implemented. What we will do is check the session for when the user most recently logged in. And if it's not recently, then we show them a message that looks like this. You might need a URL. This will have a URL. It'll look something like this. You could make the message customizable so that the user can, so that you, the developer, can swap out the word upgrade in the URL, and it'll swap out the word upgrade there. You might want to have a whitelist of those. And here's some quick pseudocode for it. I will tell you that Django there's a Django app called Elevate that can do this for you.
So the reason you might do something like Pseudomode is you don't trust your users to log out. There is a permanent logout, however. And a funny thing about popular websites is that people start asking for their accounts to be deleted. It can fill up your support queue, in fact. Sometimes people want their personal data to be visible online in fewer places. Other people want to know no one is going to break into their account. Whatever the reason, if an account is deleted, that's pretty secure. You don't have to hard delete the data, depending on your jurisdiction and some GDPR stuff. If no one on the internet can log into the account with its correct username and passwords, that's pretty good. And so I guess we'll close by saying that the absolute best way to secure an account is to not have the account at all. These are the big 3 points. If you remember these, hopefully this will help you inform your own approaches and make the rest of the talk make sense. Make it costly, help users stay informed, empower users to defend themselves, and I think that wraps it up for us.
Yeah.
Come find us afterwards if you want to talk about this stuff more.